What happens when talent and confidence threaten fragile egos? For Brielle Saunders, a rising star in her community, a simple rap battle turned into the beginning of an unthinkable nightmare. It was New Year's Day 2014 in Columbus, Georgia. The air was alive with celebration, and the local hip-hop scene was buzzing with energy. At the center of it all was Brielle, a young woman whose talent and fearless determination had earned her respect in a space dominated by men. She wasn't just competing that night, she was thriving, outshining everyone who stepped up to the mic. But in the midst of the cheers and the rhythm of the night, there were three men whose pride could not withstand being defeated. What should have been a night of artistic expression turned into something far darker. Their resentment festered into a desire for revenge that would take Brielle to the brink of death. Three men decided that Brielle's victory had to be silenced. What began as a harmless gathering ended in violence so shocking that even seasoned investigators were left shaken. What drove these men to commit such a horrific act? And how did Brielle summon the strength to survive when the odds were stacked against her? This is a story of resilience in the face of unspeakable cruelty, a story that will challenge everything you thought you knew about survival and justice. But, before we go deeper into the story, we would like to welcome to you our channel, True Crime Zone HQ. Thank you to all our viewers and a special shout out to our subscribers for your continued support. Together, we strive to improve and bring you daily updates on both told and untold true crime stories. Please don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you haven't. Now, let's go. Brielle Saunders was born and raised in Columbus, Georgia, a city with deep musical roots and a thriving cultural scene. From a young age, she was surrounded by the sounds of gospel music, thanks to her father, a dedicated musician who believed in the transformative power of rhythm and lyrics. Music wasn't just entertainment in their home, it was a way of life, a language that carried emotion and meaning. It didn't take long for Brielle to inherit that passion. Growing up, Brielle was captivated by the idea of storytelling. She would sit with her father as he worked on his compositions, watching how he wove emotion into melodies and crafted songs that could move an audience. Inspired by his work, Brielle began experimenting with lyrics of her own. By the time she was in middle school, she was writing her own songs, infusing them with the same honesty and energy she had admired in her father's music. But as she got older, her love for music took a new direction. She discovered hip-hop, a genre that spoke to her on a deeper level. The rawness of the lyrics, the rhythm of the beats, and the power of freestyle captivated her. It was a form of expression that allowed her to tell her own story, to channel her thoughts and experiences into words that demanded to be heard. Brielle knew she had found her calling. By the time she was a teenager, Brielle began making a name for herself in Columbus's underground rap scene. Freestyle battles were her arena, a place where she could showcase her quick wit and undeniable talent. In a male-dominated space where respect wasn't easily given, Brielle stood her ground. Her confidence was magnetic, and her skill left little room for doubt. She wasn't just competing, she was commanding the stage, proving that she belonged. However, her journey wasn't without challenges. Brielle faced criticism and skepticism, often from those who couldn't accept the idea of a woman excelling in a field dominated by men. She dealt with dismissive attitudes, harsh comments, and moments of outright hostility. But instead of backing down, she used those challenges as fuel. With every performance, she silenced her critics, earning the admiration of audiences who came to recognize her as one of the best in the scene. Her reputation grew, and with it, her ambitions. For Brielle, rap wasn't just a platform for self-expression, it was a way to connect with others, to inspire those who felt overlooked or underestimated. She wanted to show the world that a woman's voice in hip-hop could be just as powerful, just as impactful, as any man's. And she was succeeding. But success in a competitive space often comes with unforeseen dangers. While most admired Brielle for her talent and determination, there were those who saw her confidence as a challenge, her victories as a threat. Among them were three men whose lives were shaped by anger and a toxic need for control, men who would soon cross paths with Brielle in a way that no one could have anticipated. Robert Johnson, Katori Glover, and Joey Garin were three individuals bound together by a shared history of dysfunction and violence. Though each had their own story, their paths converged in ways that would ultimately prove catastrophic. At 25, Robert Johnson was the self-proclaimed leader of the group. Those who knew him described him as domineering and manipulative, someone who thrived on controlling others. But Johnson's troubled past painted a darker picture. As a teenager, he was convicted of sexually assaulting an 8-year-old girl, a crime that showcased his warped sense of entitlement and lack of empathy. He showed no remorse for his actions, dismissing his crime as a misunderstanding, a chilling glimpse into his mentality. Over the years, Johnson developed a reputation as someone who used intimidation to get what he wanted. Whether it was through his physical presence or his sharp tongue, he had a way of asserting dominance over those around him. But his need for control wasn't rooted in strength, it stemmed from insecurity. Johnson's ego couldn't tolerate failure or rejection, and he would go to great lengths to maintain his sense of superiority. At 26, Katori Glover was the enforcer of the group. Quiet and seemingly composed, Glover was the kind of person who could fly under the radar, but those who knew him well understood that he was far from harmless. His criminal record included theft and assault, evidence of a man whose impulsive nature often led him into trouble. Glover's temperament was unpredictable. He could appear calm one moment, only to lash out without warning the next. This volatility made him dangerous, especially when combined with Johnson's manipulative tendencies. Glover often acted on impulse, and his decisions were rarely driven by logic. He followed Johnson's lead, but his unpredictable behavior added an element of chaos to the group dynamic. At 22, Joey Garin was the youngest of the trio. Unlike Johnson and Glover, Garin wasn't known for aggression or dominance. Instead, he was insecure and eager to fit in. He aligned himself with stronger personalities, seeking validation and acceptance from those around him. But his desire to prove himself often led him to participate in actions he might not have otherwise considered. Garin's insecurities didn't make him any less complicit. In fact, they often fueled his involvement in the group's activities. He wanted to belong, and he was willing to go along with whatever was required to secure his place within the group. His need for approval made him an easy follower, but it also made him dangerous. When surrounded by individuals like Johnson and Glover, Garin became a willing participant in their schemes. Together, Johnson, Glover, and Garin formed a volatile combination. Johnson's need for control, Glover's impulsive aggression, and Garin's desire for validation created a dynamic that was both unstable and dangerous. Their shared insecurities bonded them, but those same insecurities made them hypersensitive to anything they perceived as a challenge to their authority. For these men, Brielle Saunders was more than a talented performer. She was a symbol of everything they couldn't tolerate: confidence, success, and the ability to command respect without fear. Her presence at the rap battle on New Year's Eve wasn't just a coincidence. It was the moment their fragile egos collided with her undeniable strength, setting the stage for the unthinkable events that would follow. What began as a night of celebration was about to turn into a nightmare. For Brielle, the challenge of standing out in a male-dominated space had always been part of her journey. But on that night, her strength and talent would make her a target. And the three men who resented her success would stop at nothing to reclaim their sense of power. The horrific act happened on New Year's Eve 2013, which was a night filled with anticipation and energy. The house on Garden Drive was alive that night. It wasn't just a party, it was a gathering of creativity, competition, and camaraderie. The energy in the room was electric, the beats reverberating through the walls as voices rose in syncopation, cheering and challenging. Freestyle rap battles were the highlight, where each participant brought their best rhymes, pushing boundaries to win over the crowd. Brielle Saunders entered the room with the kind of confidence that could silence the noise around her. She didn't need to announce herself, her presence alone was enough to draw attention. As the battle began, she observed her opponents, listening carefully to their lines and gauging the rhythm of the room. And when it was her turn, she stepped forward with a calm determination that spoke volumes. Her delivery was sharp, her words weaving intricate stories that left no doubt about her talent. Each verse landed with precision, eliciting cheers and laughter from the crowd. She had the ability to command not just the mic but the room itself. She wasn't just performing, she was captivating her audience, drawing them into her world with every line she delivered. Robert Johnson stood near the back of the room, watching Brielle with narrowed eyes. He had entered the battle with his usual bravado, expecting to dominate, but Brielle had stolen the spotlight. He exchanged glances with Katori Glover, whose jaw was clenched as he leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Joey Garin, standing slightly behind them, shifted nervously, his gaze darting between his friends and the crowd. To the untrained eye, the trio might have seemed indifferent, but anyone paying close attention could sense the tension building. For Johnson, Glover, and Garin, this wasn't just a loss, it was an affront to their pride. They had come to assert themselves, to establish their dominance, and Brielle's victory had turned the tables. The men whispered among themselves, their tones hushed but their expressions betraying their growing irritation. Brielle, unaware of their hostility, continued to bask in the aftermath of her performance. She mingled with friends, laughing and reflecting on the battle. Her confidence was unshakable, her joy infectious. She had done what she set out to do, prove once again that she belonged in the spotlight. But as the party continued, the admiration of her supporters was matched by the seething resentment of the three men who couldn't accept her success. As the night wore on, the crowd began to thin, the once lively energy giving way to a more subdued atmosphere. Brielle prepared to leave, unaware that Johnson, Glover, and Garin were still lingering. Their conversation had shifted from frustration to something far more dangerous. They weren't just angry, they were plotting. When Brielle stepped out into the cool night air, the sound of distant laughter and muffled beats from inside the house followed her. She walked toward her car, her thoughts still buzzing with the excitement of the evening. But her path was soon intercepted by Johnson, Glover, and Garin, who approached her with feigned friendliness. Their smiles were forced, their words rehearsed as they suggested continuing the freestyle session elsewhere. Brielle, confident in her abilities and trusting in the camaraderie of the rap community, saw no reason to refuse. As they climbed into her car, the atmosphere seemed normal at first. The men joked and talked about the night, their voices blending with the hum of the engine as Brielle navigated the streets. But as the conversation shifted, so did the mood in the car. Glover, sitting in the passenger seat, leaned closer, his tone growing sharper. Johnson, from the back seat, gave directions in a voice that left no room for argument. The camaraderie that had brought them together began to unravel, replaced by an undercurrent of something far more sinister. Then, without warning, Glover pulled out a gun. The sight of the weapon sent a jolt of fear through Brielle, her grip tightening on the steering wheel. "Keep driving," he ordered, his voice cold and commanding. Johnson and Garin fell silent, their presence looming in the confined space of the car. Brielle's heart raced, her mind scrambling to process what was happening, but she forced herself to remain calm. She knew that panic would only make things worse. The men directed her to Far Road, a part of town known for its isolation. The once bright streets grew darker, the familiar landmarks replaced by stretches of empty road and abandoned buildings. The hum of the car engine was the only sound, amplifying the tension that filled the air. Brielle's thoughts raced as she tried to assess her options. She was outnumbered, outpowered, but she refused to let fear consume her. When they reached the desolate lot, Glover ordered her to stop the car. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of doors opening and footsteps crunching against gravel. The men pulled Brielle from the driver's seat, their movements calculated as they positioned her between them. Johnson's voice was calm but chilling as he gave orders, his words punctuated by the metallic click of the gun in Glover's hand. Brielle pleaded with them, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. She tried to reason with them, to appeal to any humanity they might still possess. But her words were met with cold indifference. For the three men, this wasn't about reason, it was about power. They had already decided what they were going to do, and nothing she said would change their minds. Under the cover of night, in a lot devoid of light and life, Brielle Saunders faced the unthinkable. The men surrounded her, their actions a stark contrast to the lively celebration that had filled the hours before. They degraded her, their words and actions stripping away any semblance of humanity. They took turns violating her, each act a display of their own depravity and desperation for control. Brielle endured unimaginable pain, but even in the darkest moments, her will to survive remained unbroken. She refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her spirit falter, clinging to the hope that she might find a way out. She memorized details, their words, their actions, the surroundings, anything that might help her later, if she could make it out alive. After hours of torment, the men weren't content with the suffering they had already inflicted. They poured gasoline over her body, the acrid smell filling the air as they prepared to destroy any evidence of their crime. Johnson raised the gun, his expression devoid of emotion, and fired. The shots echoed across the empty lot, each one a blow to Brielle's body. They believed they had finished the job, that she was gone, and they fled the scene without a second glance. But Brielle wasn't gone. Against all odds, she clung to life, her body battered but her determination intact. Through sheer willpower, she began to crawl, inch by inch, toward the faint lights in the distance. Every movement was agony, but she refused to give up. She knew that if she stopped, the men would win, and that was something she couldn't allow. What should have been a night of celebration had turned into a fight for survival. But Brielle's story was far from over. Her courage in the face of unimaginable cruelty would soon lead to a pursuit of justice that would expose the true depths of her attackers' actions. The lot on Far Road was eerily quiet after the men fled. The smell of gasoline lingered in the cold night air, mingling with the faint metallic scent of blood. The scene they left behind was one of devastation, a battered, burned body lying motionless on the ground. In their minds, they had erased every trace of their crime. But they were wrong. Brielle Saunders wasn't gone. Somewhere within her broken body burned a will to survive stronger than the cruelty she had endured. Her mind was hazy with pain, her vision blurred, but she clung to a single thought: she had to live. She couldn't let them win. With every ounce of strength she could muster, Brielle began to move. Crawling inch by inch, her body screamed in protest, every movement sending fresh waves of pain through her. The ground was rough, littered with sharp stones and debris that tore at her skin, but Brielle didn't stop. Her hands, bloodied and trembling, gripped the earth as she pulled herself forward. She didn't know how far she needed to go or if she would even make it, but she refused to give up. Imagine the sheer determination it took to keep moving, to fight through that kind of pain. How many of us would have the strength to do the same? Brielle's body had been pushed beyond its limits, but her spirit remained unbroken. What was driving her in those moments? Was it anger? Hope? A refusal to let her story end there? Or perhaps a combination of all three? The hours passed slowly, the night growing colder as Brielle inched closer to safety. Finally, her faint cries reached the ears of two passers-by. Drawn by the sound, they stumbled upon a sight that would haunt them forever: Brielle's body, charred and bleeding, lying on the ground. At first, they thought she was gone, but then they saw her chest rise and fall, shallow but steady. She was alive. Panic and urgency filled their voices as they called for help. Emergency responders arrived quickly, their faces reflecting shock and disbelief as they took in the extent of her injuries. 10 gunshot wounds. Severe burns. Yet, somehow, Brielle was still breathing. They worked tirelessly to stabilize her, marveling at her resilience even as they rushed her to the hospital. For days, Brielle's condition remained critical. Doctors fought to repair the damage to her body, their efforts a race against time. And through it all, Brielle's spirit shone. How could someone endure so much and still fight to stay alive? What gave her the strength to push forward when everything around her seemed to crumble? Her survival wasn't just a miracle, it was a testament to the sheer power of human will. While Brielle fought for her life in the hospital, law enforcement began their work. The scene at Far Road was grim, a desolate lot littered with evidence of the horrific crime. Investigators combed through the area, documenting every detail: bullet casings, fragments of clothing, and the burn marks on the ground where Brielle had been set on fire. Detectives quickly realized the gravity of the case. This wasn't just another act of violence, it was a calculated attack carried out with shocking brutality. Their determination to find those responsible was fueled not just by their duty but by the sheer inhumanity of the crime. As the weight of the case hung heavy in the air, one question remains unanswered. Who could commit such a monstrous act? And why? Witnesses from the party on Garden Drive began to come forward, providing key details about the events leading up to the abduction. Several people recounted seeing Brielle leave with 3 men, describing them as Robert Johnson, Katori Glover, and Joey Guerin. These accounts, combined with forensic evidence collected at the scene, began to build a picture of what had transpired that night. One of the most critical pieces of evidence came from Brielle herself. Despite her injuries, she provided investigators with a detailed account of the events. Her voice, though weakened by pain, carried the weight of truth. She described the men's actions, their threats, and the moments leading up to the attack. Her testimony was crucial in identifying the perpetrators and solidifying the case against them. Forensic evidence further tightened the noose around the 3 men. DNA collected from Brielle's body and the crime scene matched samples taken from the suspects. Security footage from nearby streets captured glimpses of the car on its way to Far Road, corroborating Brielle's account. The evidence was overwhelming, leaving no doubt about their guilt. When detectives confronted Johnson, Glover, and Guerin, their responses were telling. Johnson, ever the manipulator, tried to downplay his role, insisting that the events were consensual. Glover remained stoic, his silence an attempt to shield himself from further incrimination. Guerin, the youngest and most insecure of the trio, cracked under pressure, his inconsistent statements adding weight to the case against them. What does it say about their mindset that even when confronted with overwhelming evidence, they tried to deny their actions? Were they incapable of remorse, or did they truly believe they could escape accountability? These are questions that lingered in the minds of investigators as they prepared their case. One thing was certain: justice was coming. Before we venture into the trial, if you're yet to subscribe to our channel, we argue you consider subscribing. Your subscription is the best way of supporting and showing gratitude to our efforts towards this journey of revealing the told and untold crime stories that happens within our society. Be part of this journey, sharing all your thoughts in the comments section, and don't forget to subscribe. Now, let's continue. The trial of Robert Johnson, Katori Glover, and Joey Guerin became a focal point for the community, a moment of reckoning for the horrific crime they had committed. The courtroom was packed with spectators, reporters, and supporters of Brielle, all eager to see justice served. The atmosphere was heavy with anticipation, each day of the trial bringing new revelations about the events of that night. Brielle Saunders took the stand, her presence commanding despite the physical and emotional scars she carried. Her testimony was both heartbreaking and powerful as she recounted the details of the attack. She spoke of the fear she felt as the men surrounded her, the pain they inflicted, and the moment she decided she would not let them win. Every word was a testament to her strength and courage, a reminder of her determination to ensure they were held accountable. The prosecution presented an airtight case. They laid out the forensic evidence, the witness testimonies, and the defendant's own inconsistent statements, painting a damning picture of their actions. The jury listened intently as the prosecutor detailed the depravity of the crime, emphasizing the calculated cruelty with which it was carried out. The defense, in contrast, struggled to present a cohesive argument. Their attempts to cast doubt on Brielle's account were met with skepticism, particularly in the face of the overwhelming evidence. The interrogation videos, in which the men claimed Brielle had consented to their actions, only served to highlight their lack of remorse. When the verdict was read, the courtroom fell silent. Robert Johnson and Katori Glover were each sentenced to 6 life terms plus an additional 95 years, while Joey Guerin received 5 life terms and 70 years. The sentences were met with relief and applause from the gallery, a reflection of the community's collective demand for justice. As the gavel struck, signaling the end of the trial, Brielle Saunders became more than a survivor, she became a symbol of resilience and strength. Her courage in facing her attackers and sharing her story ensured that their actions would not go unpunished. For the community, her victory was a reminder of the power of justice, even in the face of unimaginable cruelty. Though the trial had ended, Brielle's journey was far from over. But her bravery had sparked a movement, inspiring others to speak out and fight for justice. Her story, though born of tragedy, had become a beacon of hope. Surviving the attack was only the first step in Brielle Saunders' journey. The physical and emotional toll it had taken on her was immense. 10 gunshot wounds, severe burns, and countless bruises told the story of what her body had endured. But the scars she carried were not just on the surface, they ran deep into her psyche, a constant reminder of the night that changed her life forever. The road to recovery was long and grueling. Brielle spent months in the hospital undergoing multiple surgeries to repair the damage to her body. Skin grafts were necessary to treat her burns, and physical therapy became a daily battle as she worked to regain strength and mobility. Every movement was a challenge, but she faced each one with the same resilience that had kept her alive on Far Road. Her emotional healing was equally challenging. Nightmares and flashbacks haunted her, forcing her to relive the attack in vivid detail. Simple sounds, a car door closing, distant laughter, could send her spiraling into fear, but through it all, Brielle refused to let the trauma define her. She sought the help of therapists and counselors who guided her through the process of reclaiming her sense of safety and self-worth. Brielle wasn't alone in her journey. Her family became her foundation, providing unwavering support as she navigated the difficult path ahead. Her father, who had inspired her love of music, was by her side every step of the way, reminding her of the strength she had always possessed. Friends and members of the community rallied around her, raising funds for her medical expenses and offering words of encouragement. They saw her not just as a victim, but as a symbol of survival and resilience. What does it take to rebuild a life after such a tragedy? How do you find the courage to face each day, knowing what you've endured? For Brielle, the answers lay in the people who surrounded her and in the determination she had cultivated throughout her life. She knew she couldn't change the past, but she was determined to shape her future. And slowly, day by day, Brielle began to heal. Her body grew stronger, her scars faded, and her voice, both literal and metaphorical, returned. She resumed writing, using her music as a form of therapy and a way to reclaim the power that had been taken from her. Through her words, she found a way to tell her story, to inspire others who had faced their own battles. Brielle Saunders' story didn't just affect those who knew her, it resonated far beyond the borders of Columbus, Georgia. The sheer brutality of the crime shocked the nation, sparking conversations about violence against women and the need for systemic change. Brielle's courage in coming forward and sharing her story became a rallying cry for those who had long felt silenced. In the wake of the trial, community leaders and activists began pushing for stronger protections for survivors of violence. Public forums were held to address the gaps in local policies, and lawmakers were urged to implement harsher penalties for violent offenders. Brielle's case served as a reminder that the justice system, while capable of holding perpetrators accountable, needed to do more to prevent such crimes in the first place. For many, Brielle's resilience became a source of inspiration. Her willingness to confront her attackers in court, to relive the trauma for the sake of justice, encouraged others to speak out. Survivors who had once felt isolated found strength in her example, sharing their own stories and demanding change. What does it say about our society that it often takes a tragedy of this magnitude to spark action? And how can we ensure that these conversations lead to real, lasting change? Organizations dedicated to supporting survivors saw an outpouring of donations and volunteers, many of whom were moved by Brielle's story. Programs were created to provide resources for those affected by violence, offering counseling, legal aid, and safe housing. The ripple effect of Brielle's courage was undeniable, a testament to the power of one voice to ignite a movement. Brielle Saunders' story is one of survival, but it's also one of strength, resilience, and hope. She endured what most of us could never imagine, yet she refused to let her attackers define her. Instead, she turned her pain into purpose, using her voice to inspire change and bring attention to issues that too often go ignored. Her journey raises questions that we, as a society, must grapple with. How do we protect those who are most vulnerable? What can we do to prevent such atrocities from happening again? And how do we ensure that survivors are met with support and compassion, rather than judgment or skepticism? Brielle's strength reminds us that even in the face of unimaginable cruelty, the human spirit can endure. But survival isn't enough. Justice, accountability, and systemic change are necessary to create a world where stories like hers are no longer a reality. What role will you play in that effort? Will you stand with survivors, amplify their voices, and push for the changes that are so desperately needed? As we reflect on Brielle's story, let us honor her courage by taking action. Whether it's educating ourselves, supporting organizations that fight for justice, or simply listening to those who have been silenced, we all have a part to play. Because the fight for justice isn't just Brielle's fight, it's all of ours. Thank you for listening to Brielle Saunders' story. If her journey moved you, consider subscribing to this channel and share this video, supporting local organizations that aid survivors, and joining the conversation about justice and change. Don't forget to leave all your thoughts in the comments section. Together, we can make a difference.